Timing isn't everything, but trusting God's timing changes everything.
There's something quiet about the early morning sky before the sun even dares to rise. It's not dark exactly. It's that in-between hour where the world holds its breath. Not yet day, no longer night. The stillness feels almost sacred. And sometimes if you're in the middle of a hard season, it feels like a mirror of your life, stuck in the waiting, unfinished, unclear. You've done all the right things. You've prayed. You've persevered. You've held your breath through disappointment after disappointment. But still, the breakthrough hasn't come. The answer hasn't arrived. The door hasn't opened. And it starts to feel like heaven has gone quiet. Maybe no one else sees how long you've been carrying that silent hope. Maybe no one else notices how heavy it feels to keep showing up when nothing seems to change. But I want to say something out loud today. Something I hope seeps deep into your soul. God is not late. He's not absent. He's not ignoring you. He is preparing something deeper, stronger, and more lasting than you imagined. And sometimes, the only way to build the kind of faith that can carry your future is to walk through the season that tests it. Waiting does not mean you've been forgotten. Silence does not mean abandonment. Delay is not the same as denial. In fact, the space between your prayer and His answer is often where God is doing His most important work, not just around you, but within you. The world will tell you that faster is better, that if it doesn't happen now, maybe it was never meant to. But faith says otherwise. Faith says even when you don't see the way, God is still moving. Even when you don't feel Him close, God is still near. Even when nothing changes, you are still being changed. This message today is for the person who's been faithful and yet still waiting. It's for the heart that's grown tired of hoping but hasn't given up yet. And it's for anyone who needs to be reminded that God's timing isn't about rushing, it's about perfecting. So let's begin this journey together. A journey back to trust. A reminder that no matter how long it's been, you are right on time for what God is preparing for you. Because the truth is, God is never late. Delay is not denial. God's silence is still working. It's a strange ache, isn't it? The ache of living in the hallway between closed doors and open ones, of watching others receive what you've been praying for while you're still stuck in what feels like divine pause. But friend, let's pause here together and breathe a different truth into that space. What feels like a delay is not a denial. What feels like silence is not indifference. Sometimes God's most powerful work is done in the quiet. Think of a seed buried beneath the soil. To the naked eye, it looks like nothing is happening. The surface remains still. But underneath, life is breaking forth. Slow, silent, sacred. Roots are forming. Foundations are deepening, and the only reason the sprout hasn't broken the surface is because it's not ready yet. But it will, in time, at the right time, and not a moment too soon. That's how the Spirit works in your life. That's how God works behind the scenes, not at the speed of your schedule, but at the depth of your purpose. In 2 Peter 3:9, we're reminded, the Lord is not slow in keeping His promise, as some understand slowness. Instead, He is patient with you. That verse is more than comforting. It's revealing. It means God's timing isn't just about dates on a calendar. It's about your formation. His promises are not postponed. They're prepared. Prepared in perfect alignment with who you are becoming and what He knows you're ready to carry. And maybe that's why the silence hurts. Because you feel ready. You've done the inner work. You've healed the old wounds. You've stepped out in faith. You've waited patiently and then impatiently. You've wondered what else you could possibly do, but still, the answer delays. That's where real faith begins. Not when you receive the miracle, but when you still believe God is working even when you hear nothing. Author and pastor Max Lucado once wrote, "Faith is not the belief that God will do what you want. It is the belief that God will do what is right." That truth is both sobering and freeing. It calls us to surrender our timeline, but not our hope. It reminds us that God's silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. It just means something deeper is happening, something beyond what we can yet understand. So what do you do in the meantime? When it's been months or years and the mountain hasn't moved? When your tears have stained the pillowcase too many nights in a row, you keep showing up. You keep choosing trust. You keep building the life you have, even while waiting for the life you've prayed for. And you shift your question from why the delay to who am I becoming in the delay? Because the truth is, delay isn't wasted time. It's preparing time. If God gave you everything you asked for right now, would you be ready for it? Would you be able to steward it with wisdom, with humility, with faith? Sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes the answer is not yet. Not because you're unworthy, but because He is building in you the kind of strength that doesn't collapse under the weight of the blessing. Don't mistake preparation for punishment. Don't confuse pruning for rejection. God prunes what He intends to grow. He refines what He intends to use. And while the world tells you that if it's not happening now, you should move on, faith tells you something radically different. Faith says, stay, believe, hold your ground, even when nothing looks different. Because the deeper the roots, the higher the branches will grow. And the longer the preparation, the greater the promise. Sometimes silence is sacred. Sometimes it's God saying, I'm not ignoring you, I'm forming you. And when the time is right, you'll see why the wait was worth it. Let me say this clearly. To the person who feels like time is slipping through your fingers, you are not late. You are not behind. You are not overlooked. You are not forgotten. You are exactly where you need to be to receive what God has for you, when He knows you're ready. And while you wait, know this: the waiting is not empty. It's building muscle in your soul. It's creating clarity. It's teaching you to hear God's whisper even when the world is loud. It's reminding you that your identity is not in the outcome, but in the one who holds the outcome. So don't despise the delay. Don't curse the silence. Don't give up because heaven seems quiet. What you're going through now is not the end of your story. It's the stretching before the shift, the pruning before the promise, the refining before the release. Faith isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just choosing to stand in the quiet and say, I still believe. And that kind of faith, that changes everything.
He's not in a hurry, but He's never late. There's a particular kind of restlessness that sets in when you feel like your life is lagging behind. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes it hums quietly in the background of your days, like a question you're too afraid to say out loud. Shouldn't I be further along by now? Maybe you thought you'd be married by now, or have a family, or a career that feels fulfilling. Maybe you thought the healing would have already happened, that your finances would be stable, that you'd finally stop crying over something that ended years ago. But here you are, still waiting, still hoping, still wondering if you somehow missed your moment. And then you hear that still stubborn whisper of truth. God is not in a hurry, but He's never late. We serve a God who operates on a different clock, a God who doesn't rush just because we're uncomfortable, a God who holds eternity in his hands and isn't panicked by your age, your timeline, or your fear of being too late. He sees the whole picture, not just the piece you're holding today, and he's not pacing the floor of heaven, wondering how he'll fix your life. He's already writing it, slowly, wisely, beautifully. But oh, how hard it is to wait when you feel the world speeding by. How hard it is to trust when people your age seem to be celebrating everything you've been praying for. Engagements, promotions, babies, blessings. You scroll through pictures of their smiles while silently trying to make peace with your own unanswered prayers. That's where trust becomes more than a word. It becomes a posture, a decision, a lived-out surrender. Not long ago, I spoke with a woman named Elena from a quiet town just outside Seville, Spain. She was 47, soft-spoken, the kind of person whose words carry weight because they're rare and deeply felt. For nearly 2 decades, Elena and her husband had prayed for a child. They tried everything, medications, procedures, every form of hopeful persistence they could afford. And yet, year after year, the answer was still no. There were days, she said, when the pain felt physical, when walking past a playground stung like a wound reopening, when watching friends become parents over and over again felt like God had passed her by. I kept asking, she told me, why not me? I would have loved them so well. But Elena didn't let the heartbreak turn her bitter. Instead, she did something quietly radical. She began to live in a posture of availability. If I can't give birth to a child, she said, then maybe I'm meant to give a child a place to belong. And so she opened her heart to adoption. But not just any adoption. She signed up to foster children with special needs, the kind of children most people avoided. And on her 47th birthday, a call came in. An infant girl had been abandoned in a hospital hallway, born premature, undernourished, diagnosed with Down syndrome. No one had claimed her. Did Elena want to meet her? She didn't hesitate. She walked into that hospital room and saw the tiny girl lying there, wrapped in too many blankets, as if someone had tried to protect her, but didn't know how. Elena reached out, touched her hand, and whispered the first words the child would ever hear from someone who loved her. You were waited for. You were wanted. You are home. That little girl is 7 now. Her name is Lucia, which means light. She dances in Elena's kitchen every morning and sings songs that have no lyrics, but are full of joy. And every year on her birthday, Elena thanks God for the day everything finally made sense. When I held her, Elena told me, I knew why I had waited so long. It wasn't a delay. It was preparation. I wasn't ready before. My heart wasn't strong enough to love a child like Lucia the way she deserved. But God knew. And he wasn't late. There's something holy about stories like Elena's. Not because they end in a fairy tale, but because they remind us that faith isn't about controlling the outcome. It's about trusting the timing. Trusting that what feels delayed is often divinely orchestrated. Trusting that you're not being punished, you're being positioned. Scripture says in Ecclesiastes 3:1, there is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. That doesn't mean everything will happen when you want it to. It means everything will happen when it's supposed to. But trusting God's pace requires unlearning what the world teaches us. We're taught that life is a race, that if you're not first, you're last, that if you don't hit certain milestones by a certain age, you've missed your chance. But heaven doesn't run on deadlines. It runs on destiny. Sometimes God will slow you down, not because he's denying your request, but because he's protecting you from arriving unprepared. He's growing your roots before he reveals your fruit. He's teaching you how to carry joy without needing circumstances to be perfect. He's making sure that when you do step into your season, you'll do it with strength, humility, and wisdom. Author and wellness teacher Lala Delia once wrote, "Everything comes to you at the right time. Be patient and trust the process." And I would add, trust the one who wrote the process. Trust the heart behind the delay. Trust the eyes that see the whole path, not just the part you're standing on today. I know how hard it is to trust when nothing seems to be happening. I know the ache of unanswered prayers, the sting of missed opportunities, the quiet panic of watching the years pass without clarity. But let me speak this to you like a friend, not a preacher. You're not too late, and God is not too slow. In fact, what if this is the sacred middle? What if the timing you're so frustrated with is the very thing keeping you aligned with your deeper calling? What if the pause is protecting you from lesser things so you don't settle too early? What if the silence is making you sensitive enough to hear God's voice when He finally says, "Now"? And if you think you're too old, remember Abraham and Sarah. If you think you're too messed up, remember Paul. If you think you've missed your chance, remember Moses didn't start his calling until he was 80. God isn't looking for people who are on time by human standards. He's looking for hearts that are open, teachable, and willing to trust Him, even in the mystery. So maybe today is less about striving and more about surrender, less about asking, "When will it happen?" and more about saying, "God, prepare me for when it does." Because when you're ready and when it's time, it will happen. Not a second too soon and not a heartbeat too late. And in that moment, you'll look back and understand. You'll see how the heartbreak built your compassion, how the delays strengthened your character, how the lonely nights made you kinder, how the disappointments didn't destroy you, they defined you. You'll see that God was never ignoring your prayers. He was answering them in a way that healed you first. I know it's hard to trust when you're still waiting. I know it's difficult to keep hoping when nothing is changing. But let me remind you of something you may have forgotten. You don't need all the answers today. You just need to keep trusting the one who holds the clock. He's not pacing. He's not nervous. He's not wondering how to make it all work. He already has. The path is drawn. The promise is written. The timing is secure. All He's asking is that you keep walking with Him, not because you understand everything, but because you trust Him through everything. So here's your invitation. Let go of the pressure to figure it all out. Let go of the false timeline the world has handed you. Let go of comparing your pace to everyone else's. You're not late. You're not lost. You're not failing. You're being led by a God who isn't rushed, by a Savior who isn't cruel, by a Father who sees your tears and treasures your trust. And one day, you'll stand in the fulfillment of what you once feared would never happen. And you'll say with full confidence, He wasn't in a hurry, but He was never late.
When it feels like nothing's changing, God is changing you. There's a quiet kind of pain that doesn't have a name, the kind that slips between the cracks of your routine and settles somewhere behind your smile. You keep waking up. You keep doing the things. You go to work, run errands, cook meals, respond to messages, maybe even say a prayer before bed. But deep down, there's a whisper you can't shake. Why does nothing feel different? You thought this would be the season where things finally moved. You prayed, fasted, believed. You stayed faithful through winter after winter, and still, no bloom. And while no one else says it out loud, you feel it, the shame of stagnancy. Like maybe you missed a sign. Like maybe everyone else is growing and moving forward and becoming, and you're still stuck in the same cycle of almosts and not yets. But what if the thing you've been looking for isn't out there? What if it's already happening, not in your circumstances, but in you? There's a passage in Psalm 139 that says, "You knit me together in my mother's womb." That's not just about your birth. That's about your becoming. God didn't stop forming you when you were born. He is still shaping your heart, still weaving healing into your story, still strengthening the foundation no one else sees. But here's the part no one talks about. Transformation doesn't always look like movement. Sometimes it looks like stillness. Sometimes it feels like nothing. You don't notice the roots growing deeper until the tree starts to bear fruit. You don't notice your own growth because you're too close to see it. But God sees it, and He's not discouraged by your lack of visible results. Real change, lasting change, it often begins in the dark, in the hidden places of your heart, in the quiet shifts of perspective, in the moments you choose not to give up, in the prayers you whisper with a tired voice, but still mean with all your soul. I want to tell you about Marcus, a man I met once in Detroit. He was a U.S. veteran, strong, disciplined, deeply principled. After returning from service, he found civilian life confusing. Nothing moved fast enough. There was no structure, no clarity, no honor code to follow. Just bills, traffic, job rejections, and loneliness. He felt like he had gone from being a protector to being invisible. He struggled quietly, days blurred together. He worked a night shift job he hated just to survive. And one winter, he hit what he called emotional rock bottom. No friends, no purpose, no sense that anything in his life mattered anymore. But Marcus wasn't the kind of man who gave up easily. So he did something small, but radical. He started volunteering at a local recovery center. Just 3 hours a week, just sweeping floors, refilling water pitchers, doing laundry. It didn't feel holy or meaningful. In his words, it felt like manual labor for broken lives. He didn't think he was helping anyone. He wasn't even sure he believed in healing anymore. But over time, something unexpected began to happen. The men in that center, recovering addicts, former gang members, parolees, they started opening up to him. They'd ask him for advice. They'd sit next to him in silence, feeling safe just by being near him. Not because he preached, but because he stayed, because he showed up, because he listened. One man told him, "You're the first person who's looked me in the eye and didn't treat me like garbage." Another said, "You make me want to try again." Marcus didn't have the words for it at the time, but what was happening was this. While nothing on the outside seemed to be changing, God was changing Marcus on the inside. Quietly, steadily, powerfully. He went on to become a certified peer counselor and now runs his own mentorship program for at-risk young men. But he'll tell you the real miracle wasn't the career shift. It was the heart shift, the way he learned to be present, the way he found meaning in small acts of service, the way he discovered that God had never stopped working, even when Marcus had stopped believing. Sometimes you are being transformed, not by the breakthrough, but by the waiting, not by the answered prayer, but by the persistence of faith when the answer hasn't come yet. And the hard truth is, that kind of change doesn't always feel good. It feels quiet. It feels unnoticed. It feels like everyone else is speeding past you while you're stuck on the side of the road, wondering what you're doing wrong. But you're not doing anything wrong. You're being rooted. You're being refined. You're being made into someone who can carry blessing without crumbling under it. Someone who can give without needing applause. Someone who can hear God's whisper even in the absence of signs. I once heard someone say, sometimes God lets you hit rock bottom so you can discover that He is the rock at the bottom. That stayed with me, because when you've reached the end of what you can fix, manage, or force, that's where faith begins. Not a loud, shiny faith, but a weathered, humble faith that still kneels in the dark and says, "Here I am, Lord. I don't understand this season, but I still belong to you." That's when change starts to take root. When you stop demanding clarity and start seeking closeness. When you stop asking, "Why is this happening?" and start asking, "Who am I becoming through this?" Psalm 37:7 says, "Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for Him." That's not a passive stillness. That's an active trust. A holy confidence that even in your stillness, you are not forgotten. Even in your waiting, God is working. So if today feels the same as yesterday, if you're wondering whether your prayers are even heard, take heart. The seed doesn't sprout the day it's planted, but every day in the ground is a day closer to the surface. Every moment of silence is a moment God is using to shape something inside you that cannot be shaken later. You're learning to endure. You're learning to hold on to joy, even when your hands are tired. You're learning how to recognize grace, not in big miracles, but in the quiet courage to keep waking up and doing your best. And one day, when the pieces finally click into place, when the blessing arrives, when the door opens, when the healing begins, you'll look back and realize that you were changing the whole time. You'll see that your character grew, your empathy deepened, your faith became unbreakable, not in the victory, but in the valley. You're not who you were a year ago, or 6 months ago, or even last week. You are evolving. You are becoming. You are being shaped by the very season that feels like it's standing still. That's the mystery of God's timing. We think He's waiting to give us something, but sometimes He's waiting with us, giving us Himself. You haven't missed your moment. You're not behind. You're in a sacred space where the most important growth is invisible. So don't lose heart if the page hasn't turned yet. Keep writing, keep praying, keep becoming. Because just when you feel like nothing's changing, God is changing everything.
The detour might be the real road. Sometimes life takes you places you never planned to go and leaves you wondering if you took a wrong turn somewhere along the way. It's easy to feel disoriented when the map you've been holding no longer matches the landscape in front of you. The job you trained for disappears. The relationship you trusted shatters. The timeline you built your hopes on disintegrates. And you're left standing in the middle of a path you didn't choose, asking a question that every human heart has whispered at some point. God, is this still the way? But what if the path you didn't plan is the one God is using to lead you? What if the detour isn't off course, but part of the course? There's a verse in Proverbs 16:9 that says, "In their hearts humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps." We dream, we organize, we strategize, and that's good. God invites us to be co-creators in this life. But even more than He cares about the plan, He cares about the person we're becoming along the journey. So sometimes, in His mercy, He'll interrupt the route. Not to punish us, but to protect us. Not to confuse us, but to call us somewhere deeper. When the road bends away from what we expected, it's tempting to assume something's gone wrong. But just because the path is unfamiliar doesn't mean it's unholy. Detours aren't always signs of failure. Sometimes they're signs of God's fingerprints when I'm steering us into purpose that's bigger than what we imagined. I want to tell you about a woman named Nadia, who grew up in a small town near Krakow, Poland. From the time she was a little girl, she dreamed of becoming a fashion designer. She sketched dresses in the back of her school books, taped magazine pages to her bedroom wall, and applied to design school in Milan with a heart full of vision and ambition. She was accepted, and it felt like her future was finally taking off. But during her first semester abroad, her father suffered a severe stroke. Her mother had passed away years earlier, and Nadia was his only family. Without a second thought, she withdrew from school and returned home to care for him. What was meant to be a short break turned into months, then years. Her days were spent managing medications, preparing meals, sitting in long silences next to a man who could no longer speak. Her sketchbook gathered dust on a shelf, and though she never once voiced resentment, she told me later there were nights she sat by the window and cried quietly, wondering if God had forgotten her dream. But here's the part that still gives me chills. To pass the time during her father's long naps, Nadia began to draw again. Not dresses this time, but people, faces, gestures, souls. And she began to paint, often by candlelight, often with tears. She started uploading her work online. No hashtags, no strategy, just a quiet offering from a hidden place. One day, a priest in Germany came across her painting of Mary holding the crucified Jesus in a dark, candlelit room. He messaged her, asking if she would create a mural for their parish. Then came a request from Rome, then Vienna, then London. Within 3 years, Nadia's art, sacred, haunting, intimate, was gracing the walls of cathedrals across Europe. She now paints full-time, creating devotional art inspired by suffering, silence, and the hidden seasons of God's work. She told me something I'll never forget. I thought I had lost my dream when I left Milan, but I hadn't lost it. It had just changed shape. I was meant to design beauty, but not for runways, for souls. Nadia didn't plan to become a religious artist. That wasn't her map. But God had a road she couldn't see, a detour that didn't erase her calling. It refined it. I think we all have versions of that story. Maybe you thought you were supposed to be somewhere else by now. Maybe life interrupted your momentum with a health crisis, or a loss, or a failure that knocked the wind out of you. And now you're walking a path you never wanted, wondering if God still remembers where you were trying to go. But listen, the path you're on is not lost to Him. You may not recognize it, but He does. And while it may feel like everything's off track, it might be the very place He's been leading you to all along. Christine Caine once said, God doesn't waste pain. What looks like a detour is often a redirection. That's not just poetic. That's deeply practical, because it means your disappointments are not random. They are rerouting your soul towards something deeper than surface success, toward love, compassion, wisdom, resilience, the things that truly matter, and that often can't be learned on the straight path. The people I admire most, the ones whose eyes shine with empathy and whose presence feels like peace, they didn't get that way from life going according to plan. They got that way because life didn't. They suffered, they adjusted, they surrendered. And in doing so, they became vessels of something richer than perfection. They became vessels of grace. If you're walking through a detour right now, I want you to stop seeing it as punishment. Start seeing it as preparation. You are not lost. You're learning. You're being led. And yes, this new road may be lonelier than the one you expected, but it may also be more sacred. Sometimes it's the roads that break us that also break us open. And the things that feel like endings are actually disguised beginnings. I know it's not easy to let go of the picture you had in your head, of the version of life you thought you were building. But what if the life God is building is better than the one you planned? Not easier, not shinier, but deeper, more meaningful, more eternal. There's a line in Proverbs 3:5-6 that's been quoted so often we sometimes forget its weight. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight. But in Hebrew, the word for straight doesn't mean simple or direct. It means clear, made right, aligned. In other words, it may still look winding, but it will be the right road if you're walking it with Him. So if the door closed, let it close. If the path shifted, walk it anyway. If the detour arrived uninvited, don't resist it. Ask what it's here to teach you. Ask what parts of your soul God is strengthening in this unexpected place, because He is still writing your story, not with a red pen for your mistakes, but with mercy for your becoming. You're not being punished. You're being positioned. You're not behind. You're on holy ground, and maybe, just maybe, this is the road that leads you not to the life you imagined, but to the life you were created for. So walk it. Cry if you must. Rest if you're tired, but don't turn around. The road that feels like a detour today may one day become the testimony someone else clings to when their world falls apart. God doesn't always explain His paths in advance, but He always walks them with you. And one day when you look back, you won't just see twists and turns. You'll see grace hidden in every bend. You'll see mercy in the delay. You'll see purpose rising out of the rubble of your plans, and you'll realize the detour wasn't a detour at all. It was the road. Right on time, right where you are. Somewhere along the way, many of us began to believe that meaning only happens later, after the struggle, after the miracle, after the story makes sense. That if we're still in the middle, still unsure, still waiting, then maybe our life doesn't count yet. Maybe this chapter isn't good enough. Maybe we aren't good enough. But what if this exact moment, the quiet one you're standing in right now, is part of your miracle too? What if your life is already moving in time with a rhythm bigger than you can hear, and God hasn't forgotten a single beat? We're trained to chase mountaintop moments, the big break, the answered prayer, the obvious victory. But heaven moves differently. Sometimes the greatest moments of grace come not when everything changes, but when you choose to keep believing even when nothing has. When you pause, take a breath, and remember, you are not behind. You are not too late. You are not lost. You are right on time, right where you are. There's a quiet man in Denmark whose story brings this truth to life. His name is Jens, a retired railway worker living alone in a small coastal village near Aarhus. He was married once, for 40 years, to a woman named Maren, his best friend, his first and only love. She passed away 3 years ago, and since then, Jens's world has become a lot smaller. He wakes early, reads the newspaper, makes black coffee in a chipped blue mug, and every morning he walks to the local park alone and begins picking up trash. It started as something to do. The grief was too loud to sit with, so he kept his hands moving. At first, people thought he worked for the city, but then they noticed he didn't wear a uniform. He didn't clock in. He just came every day. Same time, same slow pace. One woman asked him why he did it. He shrugged and said, "It keeps the sadness from taking over." One bitter winter morning, a mother came racing into the park screaming. Her 5-year-old son had slipped on the ice and fallen into the canal that ran near the edge of the trail. No one else was nearby. Jens didn't hesitate. He dropped the bag of trash, ran to the bank, threw off his coat, and dove in. He pulled the boy out, wrapped him in his own scarf, and stayed with them until the ambulance arrived. The boy recovered completely. The mother never forgot. Later that week, she brought Jens a pie and asked him, through tears, "Why were you there that day? That exact moment?" Jens looked down at his hands, still red from the cold, and said something she never forgot. "I didn't have anywhere else to be, but maybe this is where I was meant to be." Jens never went viral. His story didn't make international news, but in one quiet moment, on a day that started like all the others, his presence saved a life. His grief made space for grace. And the place he thought was just a way to stay busy turned out to be the very place God used him. He was right on time, right where he was. It's easy to believe that only the big moments matter, but sometimes God uses small obedience to make eternal impact. The routine you think is meaningless, the place you think is just a waiting room, the habit you almost gave up on because it seemed invisible, God sees it and He honors it. Because timing with God isn't about spectacle. It's about surrender. It's not about speed. It's about availability. We forget that Jesus didn't rush. When Lazarus died, Jesus waited. When Jairus' daughter was sick, Jesus paused to heal someone else first. Over and over again, He walked at the pace of presence, not pressure. And still, He was always on time. We live in a world addicted to acceleration, faster internet, faster results, faster healing. But the soul doesn't grow on speed. It grows in stillness, in process, in faithfulness. There's a quote I heard once from an anonymous source that stayed with me. God's timing is never early, never late. It takes a little patience and faith, but it's always worth the wait. And I'd add, sometimes it also takes trust that the moment you're living now is not just a pause between real life. It is life, and it matters deeply. In Romans 5:6, Paul reminds us, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Not early, not delayed, at just the right time. And if Christ could show up at the perfect moment in the greatest story ever told, salvation itself, then surely He knows how to show up in yours too. Right now, you may be walking a long road. Maybe no one's clapping. Maybe no doors have opened. Maybe you haven't seen the fruit of your faithfulness yet, but God has. And He hasn't left the room. Not for a second. You are not a mistake. You are not forgotten. You are not too late. You are being led minute by minute, prayer by prayer, breath by breath. And when the time comes, when the doors open, when the right people appear, when the tears finally make sense, you'll look back and realize that God wasn't just ahead of you, He was with you. In every quiet morning, in every detour, in every no that made way for a better yes. So today, wherever you are, on the mountaintop, in the hallway, or in the pit, take this with you. God is not late. He's just not in a rush, and that's what makes His timing perfect. Final reflection and original life motto. And maybe, just maybe, the deepest kind of miracle isn't when everything falls into place, but when you keep walking, even when it doesn't. When you keep loving, even when it hurts. When you keep showing up to life, even when no one's watching. Because this, right here, right now, this is your story. And it is not on pause. So if no one has said it to you lately, let me be the one to speak it into your heart. You are right on time. Not too early, not too late, right on time for your healing, for your growth, for your next step. Even if you don't see the full picture yet, and if it feels like God is late, He's not. He's just building something deeper than you expected.